Hi everyone, James Egersdorff here, previewing game week 8 of the Fantasy Premier League. So I'm going to take the usual format for the video. I'm going to review game week 7, talk a bit about the upcoming game week this weekend, game week 8. I'm going to talk about some differential options, the FPL Doughnut, and then we're going to chat about captaincy options. So not a bad game week for me last time round. I badly needed a decent score and managed to come in with 57. As you know, if you watch the videos regularly, I always aim for 50. I think that's a sort of okay position to be in. If you hit 50 every week, ideally you hit more than 50, but if you hit 50, then that's kind of average, and that should keep you up there and thereabouts as you tick along throughout the season. So I'd been flirting with 50 in sort of game weeks 5 and 6. I got 40 something and not quite got that 50 mark, and that had sent me down with a couple of red arrows. But a nice green arrow this week. I'm up to 864,000. Better than I was, so heading in the right direction. All I need now is a bit of momentum and a few consecutive green arrows, and that'll get me right back up there towards where I want to be. So fairly consistent throughout the team, no real stars. Aguero captain 8 points, Hazard with 10 points, clean sheet from Bennett of Wolves, and a couple of assists thrown in, and that was the mix-up of the scores. Not bad, but not great. So game week 8 I think is a really interesting game week, and why it's interesting is a lot of differentials suddenly opening up, and it kind of means that we can't fit all these players into our team, so a lot of strategy comes into the game, a lot of forward planning, but also an element of luck is going to come in now, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that. On the flip side, that's kind of what makes FPL fun, and why we like playing is that, like I said, you can't have all the players in your team, and you've got to try and find your reasons, your reasons personally for going with the players that you choose. And of course, the big question, or if you like, the big conundrum this week, whether you get Harry Kane into your team. If you've got him already, that's cool, that's really good. If you've not got him like me, it basically means that you're looking at taking out maybe one or two of your star or more premium level players in order to fit him in. And yes, you have to admit that Cardiff home match is very enticing. But the Harry Kane conundrum, and we'll talk about people in my position here who don't have Harry Kane at the minute, it does come down, I think, to team structure. Because you've got Salah, who's 13 million, who I don't have at the minute. I took him out because I didn't feel he's good value. Kane is up there, he's 12.5, so to fit him in, you do have to do a bit of surgery on your team. If then you want to take him out at the other side or in a few weeks, a bit more surgery is required. So for me to get him in anyway would cost me 4 points. I'd have to pay a 4-point penalty just to get him into my team. And I think it's pretty fair to say that Liverpool's fixtures after this Man City game, they play Huddersfield away, they play Cardiff, then they're away at Arsenal, and then they've got Fulham at home. So you're looking 3 out of those 4 games are really, really favourable, and you're stuck with Kane. In that same period, he plays West Ham away, he then plays City, I think, and then he's got Wolves away, and he's got Palace away. So Wolves and Palace are fairly defensive-minded teams, or certainly their managers, like to keep it tight. Doesn't lend itself to great captaincy options, I don't think, there for Kane. So it is really a big conundrum. It goes down to your personal research, your personal eye test, so actually watching the matches. I've watched Kane, I watched the Brighton game a few weeks ago, and I watched Barcelona game last night. I thought he looked okay. He didn't blow me away, but he looked all right. We can't dispute that he isn't on form, but a couple of the goals he scored recently have been penalties. And I think another challenge for him is that, and this isn't me trying to put people off, this is probably more justified in my mind, not owning him, why it might not be as big a blow. Spurs don't have players like Eriksen at the minute, they don't have Dembele. I've said before, last season, I think in a roundabout way, Dembele is possibly Spurs' best player. What I mean by that is I think when he's in the team, it makes them a totally different outfit. He's got a very unique ability where he's able to take players on and move the ball between the lines, which is great for people like Harry running off defenders and getting played in. Lamella, I think, went off looked like a calf strain. I don't know if it was just cramp, but he went off injured the other day. He seems to have been playing well. Dele Alli might be back, but again, he's been out injured. So there's a bit of inconsistency in that Spurs team. How that will affect them at weekend remains to be seen. But from what I could work out, to get Kane in, you really need him to fire to make it worthwhile. I know that sounds pretty obvious, but unless he's probably getting 10 or more points, to do the minus, give him the captaincy, and then potentially have to maybe do another minus a bit further down the line. Let's say if you wanted Salah or an extra Liverpool player in for that great run of fixtures. There's no obvious Liverpool attacker other than maybe Firmino, but he's not on form. You're probably going to want one of Robertson, Alexander-Arnold, Mane or Salah if you don't have them already. Maybe Firmino in that group as well. So that makes it tricky because those first four, of course, they're defenders and midfielders. They're not attackers, which Kane is. So there's no kind of like-for-like swap. Factor into the mix that City, I do feel, have some pretty decent games coming up. I think they're playing Burnley at home, playing Southampton at home. They've got another decent home game in the next 5, I think. I think it's Man United actually, and I'm not trying to wind up any United fans, but I think City would fancy playing them in the current position that they're in and the challenges that they're having, especially at home. So some half-decent games for City there. The other thing, and I touched upon it there, touched upon it a bit earlier about team structure. So when you actually break down, maybe not the names, but the composition of your team. So if you look at Man City and you look at the goals scored column, so they've scored 106 last year, Premier League record. They've scored 21 this year. Contrast that with Spurs, they've scored 14. So Man City have scored 50% more goals already than Spurs. So it's probably fair to say that as the top scorers in the league, you've got to have some form of City attacker in your squad. So that's an attacking midfielder or a forward. So when you break that down, you're probably looking at, you've got what, Aguero, Sterling. I mean, I've got David Silva. I wouldn't say he's a real attacker. He's a more consistent assist and goal scorer. De Bruyne is injured. He might be back soon. But the point I'm making is that there's not many names, and you've probably got to have a City attacker in your team. Likewise, Liverpool, they're the second highest scorer at the minute. They were second highest scorer last year. So again, you probably, given the fixtures, you're going to want to have a Liverpool attacking player in your team coming up. City and Liverpool, they've got the best defences in the league. So you're going to probably want, if you don't have already, pretty soon you're going to want a Liverpool defender and probably a Man City defender in your team. So already when we start to actually look at the logic behind how your team should be comprised, you're struggling to find room to fit a Kane in without really compromising the rest of your team. And we're not even then talking about, I think, a whole bunch of fringe players that I talked about at the start of this little section about the game now heading out in some different directions. You can't fit all these players in. So, I mean, these are names off the top of my head as I was preparing for the video. So, Trippier, bang on form. Doherty at Wolves looks brilliant. You got Maddison at Leicester, just called up to the England squad. He looks great. Richarlison, Arnautovic, Mitrovic. You know, there's a number of names that are coming through now that not everybody's going to have in their team that people are going to look for, and you can't, unless you did a minus 24 points, you can't get all those names in. So that again makes it really hard. If you're picking a Kane or you're picking a Salah, probably means you can't have one of those players to balance up with them. You're going to have to take a cheaper option. And again, you've got to really be making sure you get that call right. So it's a really tricky one. I think for me, I'm reluctantly going to hang off Kane this week. I'll talk about it a bit later when we talk about captains and probably explain why. But another thing I was thinking as I was writing the video, and bearing in mind I've had ideas floating around my mind all week, who to get rid of, what I could do with the money, could I invest some points in changing the squad, and actually sometimes the best answer in FPL is just to keep it simple. We've got the international break coming up. Is it wise to take a load of points hits and then have the players away for 2 weeks? Because it always brings problems, that international break. There's always an injury, there's always a crisis somewhere that you need to address on the other side. We've got players like De Bruyne coming back from injury. We've got players like Mendy, who some of you might have transferred out and he's gone missing. He could return at any point. His points per game, I had a look as I was trying to work out whether I still needed to keep hold of this guy. He's 8 points a game on average, and that's amazing. So he's probably going to come back into that team and you'd hope return to form. So there's a whole bunch of different differentials that are coming up and happening. So that's why I think, in a funny way, keeping it simple and not getting overexcited is perhaps the way to go. So moving on to chat about differential picks. So I always pick 3 players for you, a defender, midfielder and attacker. And I tried to come up with players that perhaps aren't the obvious picks or aren't being bandied about and chatted about. So I really like, in defence, I have mentioned these guys I think last week or the week before, but I'm really impressed by Wolves. They've kept 3 clean sheets in the last 4. The goal, they've let in 1 goal in the last 4 games, and that was away to Old Trafford, to Man United. So that's pretty credible, 1 goal in 4. Their defence is bettered only by Liverpool, Chelsea and Man City, so they've got the 3rd best defence in the league in terms of goals conceded. So I don't think you can go wrong. I talked up 4 of the 5 I really like. Johnny and Doherty, the attacking fullbacks. I've got Ryan Bennett, who's really cheap, and I really like Bolle. He looks good. He looks like he could get goals and assists, and the goalie as well if you need a goalie. I don't think you can go wrong with those guys at the minute. They look great. Got some decent fixtures as well. I think in midfield, a good old mate of mine, as a Blackburn fan, I know this guy really well, and he flew a bit under the radar when he played for Blackburn. And people used to ask me who's your best player, and I'd say this guy, and not everybody knew who he was. He's since gone to Fulham. He's since been injured. I believe his price is now 4.9. He might have gone down to 4.8 actually. Tom Kearney, on his way back from injury. If you are looking for maybe a Kane and you need to balance out your squad, I don't know if he'll play this week, but he's on his way back. I think Fulham have a couple of half-decent games coming up. Maybe he could be a good mate weight if you're looking for a big hitter. The other player, and stupidly I didn't check his price before filming the video, he played brilliantly against Barcelona, just been called up for England. Harry Winks at Spurs. I don't know how well his style of play will transfer to the Premier League, because he's not actually had a huge great run in the team. He's had some injury problems, but he played really well against Barca. Ball carrying midfielder, played in that kind of Dembele role. So, maybe he could be one to keep your eye on if he's a cheap option there. And then in terms of strikers, again, somebody I had in my team at the start of the season, a few eyebrows were raised when I put this guy in. And on reflection, I probably took him out a bit too early, actually. I did my wild card in game week 4, and I took him out, and maybe I should have kept him, I don't know, but he's got some great games. This guy's playing Bournemouth, Huddersfield, Newcastle and Southampton within the next 5 games. It's Troy Deeney, Watford captain, nailed on to play, takes the penalties. Slight concern maybe, he did mention he's got a toe injury, but at the same time he said it's going to take a hell of a lot more than that to keep me out. He's got 2 weeks off after this week to get himself better and get some treatment on that. So again, he's available, fairly cheap, 6.1 maybe, 6.2. Cheap option with some good fixtures, plays every week. Watford are on form. I think that's a pretty good bet. FPL Doughnut of the week. Well, pretty easy option for me this week is a guy who I've kept on to. In hindsight, I probably kept on to him a week too long, and that's our friend Benjamin Mendy at Man City. I talked up his average points score just before. Anybody know where this guy is? The last I saw of him was a social media tweet. He was at the boxing a couple of weeks ago, waving a belt around, and I did kind of think to myself, what are you doing, mate? I was like, just get yourself at home and wind your neck in. I know Guardiola has been fuming about this guy's presence on social media and some of the stuff he does, and that shark thing that I thought was kind of funny at first, but it's just a bit insulting, and I think, to the opposition, just a bit strange. He did a shark picture the other day to poor old Hoffenheim, and if that makes you feel good, mate, then keep putting your little shark pictures up. It was very small time with this guy over the summer. If anyone saw his tweet about the World Cup, and I think he played about an hour in a pointless dead rubber game and he's waving his medal around. So clearly the mentality of this guy isn't hugely great. He's been banned from the City first team for turning up for some treatment late. So I'm looking at this and tearing my hair out a bit, going, why have I still got this guy? But hopefully we'll get some news that he's coming back some point soon. I'm actually thinking, if he's still injured, I've come this far now keeping him, I may as well stick on to him, because he's got Liverpool away. I can put in Ryan Bennett. Wolves' defence has been great. They're playing Palace. Palace have only scored 5. They've scored 2, I think, in the last 6 games, something like that. It's pretty dire. So it's not a disaster if I have to rely on Wolves again. But therefore, Mendy, sorry mate, you're not a shark of the week, you're a donut of the week. So finally, captains this week. 2 options for me. If you've got Kane, you got to go Kane, right? You can't not go Kane. If you don't have him, then I'm going to go Hazard. He's probably the form player in the league, playing Southampton, pretty inconsistent team. They're not keeping many clean sheets. I'd be surprised if Hazard plays in the European game tonight. I've not even heard of the team that they're playing. Sorry, guys, whoever you are. So yeah, I think they're the only 2 options. Like I said, do you move heaven and earth to get Kane in? Well, for me, it would mean losing Aguero. So Man City 21 goals, Spurs 14. Aguero, same role as Kane. Takes penalties. It's cheaper. Better fixtures. What's not to like? So I think they're the 2 pretty obvious options. So I hope that's been of interest. Thank you all for watching. Shout out to all my guys on Patreon. Hope you are enjoying that content, and thank you for all your support on that. And thanks for you guys for watching. Have a good game week 8. Don't get too fed up in the international break, and I'll catch you in a couple of weeks. Cheers, everybody.